The Poor Thing. A story by Paul Jennings. You wouldn't read about it. Major Mac's takeaway chicken joint had a cat that couldn't catch mice. It ran after them, it jumped at them, it tried its best, but the poor old thing just couldn't catch a mouse. Not one. The cat's name was Singin' Pooh. "It's the worst mouser in the world," said Mac. "I don't know why I keep it." From the way he spoke, it sounded as if Mac didn't like the cat at all. I felt sorry for it, but I didn't say anything, because it was my first day working at Major Mac's. After-school jobs were hard to find, and I didn't want to get the sack. I'd never heard of a cat called Singin' Pooh before. I found out later how it got its name. It seems that Mac once had a tiny transistor radio, a real small one. It was about half the size of a matchbox. One day, Mac changed the station after he'd been cutting up fish, and the cat noticed the radio had a fishy smell, and she started licking it, and before Mac could blink, the cat had swallowed the whole thing. At first, Mac was mad at the cat. He shook her this way and that, trying to get her to cough up the radio, but nothing happened. It wouldn't come out. And then he heard something strange. Music! Music was coming out of the cat's mouth. Mac grinned. He made the cat sit on the chair with her mouth open so that he could listen to the radio. Every day after that, the poor old cat had to sit next to Mac with her mouth open. Mac would listen to the footy on Saturdays. In the mornings, he tuned into the news at 7 o'clock. On Sundays, the cat was tuned into the top 40. Everybody thought it was really funny, except the cat. She had to follow Mac around everywhere with her mouth open so that he could have music wherever he went. Then one day, the music stopped. "Ah, damn!" said Mac, giving the cat a shake. "The battery's dead." At that very moment he heard a faint singing noise coming from outside. He dropped the poor cat on the floor and went to the door. The music was coming from the cat's sand tray, and there in the kitty litter was a little bit of square cat poo. The radio was in the cat poo. The cat poo was singing a song called "Please Release Me, Let Me Go." Mac was cross. He picked up the singin' poo and flushed it down the toilet. And that's how the cat came to be called Singin' Pooh. Every night the cat ate its tea from a chipped bowl. The bowl had Singin' Pooh written on the side in big letters. Not that it got much tea. Mac just didn't look after it properly. He was mad at it because it didn't play tunes anymore, and it couldn't catch mice. Sometimes, when Mac wasn't looking, I would throw a bit of fried chicken to Singin' Pooh. She would look up at me, almost as if she was smiling, and then she would gobble up the chicken as quickly as she could. All Mac gave it to eat was raw chicken claws and beaks. "It doesn't earn its keep. If it caught mice, I'd give it a drumstick or two. I keep it hungry. That way it might try a bit harder." On my first day, Mac showed me over the front of the shop. Out the front they had a place where the customers queued up. "You stand here, Scott, and you take the customers' orders, and then you repeat it into this microphone. I'll be out the back packing the chicken into boxes. When I finish each one, I'll push the box through this little window. You give it to customers, take their money." He took me out the back and showed me where the chickens were cooked. There were big ovens and vats for frying chickens. There was also a cool room where fresh batches of chicken were stored. On one of the walls was a safe with a combination lock on the front. "Oh, is that for the money?" I said to Mac. "Nah." He opened the safe and took out a black book, and on the cover it said, "Major Mac's Secret Fried Chicken Recipe of 50 different burps and spices." "No one," said Mac in a gruff voice, "is allowed to touch this book. No one." He lowered his voice and looked around. "There are people who would pay big money for what's in this book. Customers come for miles around for my special fried chicken. There's a new chicken place opening up the other side of town called the Dead Rooster. If they get me secret recipe, we'll be out of business." He put the book back in the safe. "When this book is open, you stay out the front. Nobody comes in the kitchen when the book's open, Scott." And then he said something weird, really weird. He pointed at Singin' Pooh. You stay away from the book too, Cat. No one reads the secret recipe but me." He looked at Singin' Pooh as if he thought the cat could read the book. Well, things went along okay for about a month. I soon got the hang of working the till and taking the orders. Whenever the secret recipe book was open, I stayed out of the kitchen. I didn't want Mac to think I was trying to pinch his secret recipe. Mac was a little bit odd, but he was right about one thing. His secret fried chicken sure was popular. People bought it by the barrelful. They loved it. I was flat out trying to serve the hungry crowd that turned up every night. But poor old Singin' Pooh got thinner and thinner. I tried to throw her the odd chicken wing when Mac wasn't looking, but that wasn't often. "Beaks and claws, that's all she gets until she starts catching mice. There's more of the damn things every day." There were, too. When I first started, you would see the odd mouse out behind the rubbish bins. After a while, though, they got cheekier and cheekier. They would even run across the floor between the customers' legs. One day, a lady screamed as a mouse ran over a shoe. She fled out of the shop screaming something about getting the health inspector. "Ah, useless cat!" yelled Mac. "From now on, you only get beaks, no claws. See if that'll make you run a bit faster." Singin' Pooh looked at me with sad eyes. She was all skin and bone. She seemed to be asking me for help, but there was nothing I could do. Mac was the boss. The skinnier Singin' Pooh got, the slower she ran. There was no way she was ever going to catch a mouse, and there were more and more of them every time I looked. Then the terrible day came. The Dead Rooster opened for the first time. They had a big ad in the local paper. They were selling their fried chicken at special low prices. "Trying to pinch our customers," sniffed Mac. He handed me $5. "Go over and buy a bit of their chicken. Bring it back and we'll see if it's any good." I rode my bike over to the Dead Rooster and got in the queue. I bought a chucket of chicken and took it back to Mac. He opened the box and sniffed. And then he took out a chicken wing and had a small nibble. He smacked his lips and made sucking noises. He took another bite and chewed slowly with his eyes closed. I noticed that his face was slowly turning red. He opened his eyes and looked round in rage. "It's delicious!" he screamed. "It's the same as mine. It's my secret recipe for 50 burps and spices. They've nicked me recipe. Ratbags and mongrels. Someone's given them our recipe." He glared at me with accusing eyes. "Don't look at me," I said. I didn't tell them about the secret recipe. I don't want you to go broke. I'd be out of a job if you did. I never touched your book." Max spoke slowly. "Yeah, you're right." He walked over to the safe and opened it, and then he took out the black book and flipped over the pages. One had been torn out. "Aha! Just what I thought." He pointed a long, skinny finger at Singin' Pooh. "You're the one. You're the one that give 'em the recipe." Singin' Pooh crouched down the corner. She was frightened by all his yelling. Mac had flipped his lid. He thought the cat had torn the page out of the book with his mouth. "Oh, don't be silly," I said. "Cats can't read it. Wouldn't know which page to take." "Look at this," shouted Mac. He thrust the book under my nose and pointed at a smudge on the corner of the first page. "A poor print! A poor print! This cat has been at my book." "So," I said, "Singin' Pooh probably jumped up on the table and stepped on the book. It doesn't mean that she can read it." But now Mac was so angry that he was spitting as he spoke. "I tell you, Singin' Pooh's been reading the recipe book. I suspected it for weeks. One night I saw her looking at it, and not just looking at it. She turned the pages over with her paw." I started to laugh. I just couldn't help it. The whole idea was crazy. "Singin' Pooh's got to go. I'm not having the mangy thing here for one more minute." He took $20 out of his wallet. "Take her down to the vet and have her put down." "Put down? What do you mean, put down? Put down where?" "Oh, you know, put down, put to sleep, killed," grunted Mac. I couldn't believe it. "She's innocent," I said. "Cats can't read. Someone else stole your secret recipe. It wasn't Singing Pooh. Oh, don't have her put down, please." I picked up the frightened cat and held her in my arms. Mac pointed to the door. "Well, even if she didn't read the book, she can't catch mice. She's no good to us. Go, or you're sacked." I took the $20 and walked out the door with Singing Pooh still in my arms. She was shivering with fear. Cats can tell when something's wrong. I looked round for somewhere to hide her, but there was no way that I was going to have her put down. Over the back fence of the chicken shop was an empty shed. An old lady called Mrs. Griggs owned it. I knew she never went near the shed because it was right down the bottom of her garden. She didn't need the shed. I jumped the fence and put Singing Pooh inside. "For goodness sake, don't start to meow," I said. "I'll come back every night and bring you chicken and milk." I stayed with her for about half an hour. Then I shut the shed door and went back to Mac's. Mac never said anything when I went back. He didn't even ask me for the change. I think he was feeling guilty about Singing Pooh. Every night after that I crept down the shed and fed Singing Pooh on fried chicken and milk. She got fatter and fatter. Things were not so good at Major Mac's fried chicken shop, though. More and more mice arrived with every passing day. We had a terrible job keeping them out of sight. Mac didn't want the customers to see the mice, and there were bins. They were in the bins behind the fridge. At night time they slithered across the floor in front of our eyes. We chased them around with brooms, but they weren't even scared of us. We had hundreds of mouse traps. Every morning it was my job to empty them and put the dead mice in the rubbish. Mac invented a new type of trap. He got an empty beer bottle and he put a piece of cheese in the end, and then he laid the bottle on its side with the neck sticking out over the edge of the table. He smeared butter along the neck of the bottle. On the floor underneath was a bin filled with water, and when the mice walked along the neck of the bottle to get near the cheese, they lost their footing and fell into the bin. In the morning we'd find about 200 drowned mice in the bin. It was really bad, and it was getting worse. One Saturday, when I was serving customers at the front bench, a bald-headed man came back with his chicken roll. He'd eaten about half of it, and he was a really rude bloke because he yelled at me with his mouth full. "I didn't order sesame seeds on me roll," he said, waving the half-eaten roll in my face. "We don't have sesame seeds on our roll," I said. He looked at his chicken roll carefully, and then he ran outside and spat out what he'd been eating. "Oh, yeah! Oh, disgusting! Mouse droppings! Filthy mouse droppings on my chicken roll! You'll pay for this! I'll have this place closed down!" He ran around in circles, holding his hands up to his throat, and all the customers left fast. On a sign outside was written, "Drop in for a chicken roll." A kid who was with the bald-headed man went up to the sign and wrote on it with a texter. He put in some extra letters, and now it read, "Droppings for a chicken roll." Not long after that, the health inspector arrived. He took one look at the mice running all over the floor of the shelves of the kitchen, and he said, "I'm closing the place down. You can't serve food from a store that's infested with mice." He slapped a notice on the door that said, "Closed due to a mouse plague," and then he got into his car and drove off. Mac hung his head in his hands. "Ruined! Ruined! We've got to get rid of these mice or we'll go broke." He looked at the cool room door. "Oh, no!" he went on. "The warning light has gone off. The mice must have eaten through the electricity wires. All the chickens in the cool room be ruined. There's 800 frozen chickens in that cool room." He walked over and pulled open the cool room door. There were no chickens in there. There were about 10 million mice. They poured out in a great wave that it was at least as high as Mac's head. We both screamed as the front of the mouse wave hit us and knocked us over. They flooded out into the kitchen and covered the floor, the benches, even the walls. A great squirming, wriggling, squirming squeaking river of mice. I could feel mice running up my trousers. They wriggled under my shirt, in my singlet. They were even inside my underpants. They were chewing my clothes. Mouse heads were sticking out of holes that had eaten in my jumper. The leg of one of my jeans had disappeared altogether, and the other one was following it fast. I could hear Max shouting at the top of his voice. He was pulling mice out of his hair as he waded towards the door through knee-high sea of rodents. They had eaten the shirt clean off his back. I struggled after him as quickly as I could, and we both fled out into the backyard. We jumped up and down, shaking the nibbling pests and stamping on them. And when we got the last ones out, we lay on the ground looking at the chicken shop in disbelief. Through the window we could see the whole thing was crawling with mice. It was like looking at a giant jar filled with wriggling beans. I didn't know there were that many mice in the whole world. Just then a soft meow came from over the fence. "What's that?" said Mac. "It's Singin' Pooh," I said. Mac looked at me. "Nah, can't be. Singin' Pooh's dead." I couldn't do it, Mac. I couldn't have her put to sleep. I've been hiding her in that shed. I looked at the millions of mice. Even Singin' Pooh could catch a mouse today. I'll go and get her. I jumped over the fence and fetched Singin' Pooh from the shed, and then I took her to the back door of the chicken shop and put her down. "Go get 'em, Singin' Pooh," I said, half expecting her to run off as fast as she could. I mean, what could one cat do against millions of mice? The answer is plenty. Singin' Pooh walked into that chicken shop with her tail held up in the air. She gave a couple of quick low hisses that seemed to freeze the mice. They dropped off the walls and the shelves and moved away from her like a living carpet. She herded them out of the kitchen, running this way and that, darting, skipping, nipping, hissing. They seized out of the shop and burst onto the road. Singin' Pooh stood waiting for them all to get out. It took a long time, but at last they all passed through the door, every single one. A couple of thousand made a sudden dart and tried to get back in, but Singin' Pooh was too quick for them. She rounded them up and herded them back with the main mob. Mac and I just stood there gasping. We couldn't believe it. It was incredible. The cars in the street stopped. People ran into the shops and shut the doors. They peered out of their windows and watched as Singin' Pooh moved a plague of squealing mice down the main street. Just as they reached the traffic lights, the mob divided into two groups, and one lot headed off towards the butcher's shop. I gasped. She's lost control. But in a flash, Singin' Pooh skipped lightly over the backs of the teeming herd and darted in and out, driving them back with the rest. She reminded me of a sheepdog herding sheep on a farm. Without so much as a meow, she headed the mice off towards the beach. Along the street, past the library, down past Lake Potobi, the herd squealed and scampered, but there was no escape. Singin' Pooh drove them out onto the breakwater and along to the end of the pier. There they tumbled and jumbled, an endless grey waterfall of mice plunging off the end of the pier and into the sea, and in the end every last one of them was gone, drowned, dead, done for. "You little beauty!" yelled Mac. "You little ripper! You've saved the day! Singin' Pooh, the fabulous feline!" He hoisted her up onto his shoulder. The whole town was there, cheering and clapping. The crowd went crazy with joy, especially the butcher. A photographer from the Standard took photos. Everyone wanted to stroke and pat Singin' Pooh. After a long time, we got back to the shop. "From now on," said Mac, "that cat's got to have the best of everything. And the first thing I'm going to do is give her a big feed. Where's the bowl?" "In the shed," I told him. We climbed over the fence and went into the shed, where Singin' Pooh had been locked up. Mac got Singin' Pooh's bowl and looked around the empty shed. "Ha! What's this?" He picked up a dusty book and peered at it. The book had a smudged paw mark on the pages. "Oh, I didn't notice that there," I said. It must belong to Mrs. Griggs. What's it called?" Mac turned the book over and read out the title in a whispered voice. It was called How to Train a Sheepdog.